This is a video about checking piston to valve clearance with the engine assembled. It's a method that Pete Smith taught me years ago. Pete's no longer with us. He was a great bloke. He was one of those blokes, if I had a question, I'd ring him and say, "Pete, what do you reckon?" And he usually had the answer. Certainly going to miss him. But this was his method. I think he taught me back in 1997 or something. And it's what I usually use to check piston to valve clearance. It's not an absolute measurement because it's checking valves at their inclined angle, not directly up and down, but you work with it. We always used to use 1.5 mil as a safe measurement with this method. We never had an issue. I remember Pete telling me once that he ran, I think, one of his SPS race engines down to 0.7 mil on the exhausts, and while the valve pockets were clean, there was no touching. So 1.5 mil, it's pretty safe. First we'll find top dead center. This is a top dead center tool, piston stop. I only ever use this after top dead center firing, which is there, so the exhaust valve's moving, because on a 2-valve engine with the spark plug in at the side like this tool can hit the inlet valve as the inlet valve opens. So if you do it between overlap and firing, the inlet valve will come in and it might hit the tool, you might bend the valve. So just be aware of that. The tool's in, we'll wind it back towards top dead center, which should be about here somewhere, and it didn't stop. So we'll wind it in a bit. I used this on a DS engine the other day, so the position of the plug versus the piston crown is relative, you could say. So that's right on TDC there. Go this way, see where it stops. There. It's about 34, so if we make that about 17, that should be about 14, back this way, 20. So yeah, about 17 on this is about where it needs to be. It's a little coat hanger wire. Coat hanger wire is great for this stuff. Let's turn it around so you just feel a piston nudge into it. 17. A little bit over. 16. Just be gentle, you don't want to put dents in the piston. 17 both ways, which is good. This tool is just a spark plug with the inside smashed out, an 8mm bolt through it. And this one with the 8mm bolt, it's big enough you can drill a hole all the way through, so the compression bleeds off, which is nice. So what we're doing now is just going to check the lift. We've got inlet and exhaust. I don't usually do exhaust, but this is an Elephant engine. It's done nearly 200,000 Ks. This is its second time apart. And the valves have been seated before, and they were getting to the point where the opening shims are getting fairly thin and the closing shims are getting pretty big. So we put some oversized valves in it just to pull the valves back down and onto the fresh part of the seat again. That's the only reason we did that, because it's sort of the easiest way to do it. And as far as I'm aware, the pistons in this should be identical to an SS or a Monster engine. I'm sure there wasn't any difference. And the camshafts are the 750R series cams, so they have less lift, less duration. So I just want to check to make sure that my bigger valves aren't getting too close to the piston, and that's why I'm going to check the exhaust as well. I've got a sheet that I write a whole lot of numbers down on, and then we see how far we can open the valves, and that gives us our clearance. So we'll start off. We do this all around top dead center overlap. So the exhaust valve is closing, and the valve's opening. Look around. And usually I start measuring about 30 degrees either side of top dead center. Usually the exhaust is tightest about 15 to 10 degrees before top dead center, and the inlet is tightest sort of 10 to 15 degrees after top dead center. I can't see the dial gauge on the exhaust. Oh, I haven't set my zero yet. Okay, it's got zero there, Probably should just check the timing first off. I have to take my word for the exhaust numbers. So that is 53. Spin it around to see the inlet start moving. Soon. 53, 11. Oh. 11 is the spec. This engine has had the heads machined because the heads warp sometimes and they pump oil out between the cylinder and the head. So this engine has had the heads machined at the mating surface, so theoretically the head will have come down, and usually when that happens it retards the cams, because if the cam's there and you lower it, the belt pulls it like that. So it pulls it, rolls it backwards, which retards it. So that's to top dead center. I just check the lift at top dead center usually. At 1.8 mil. The exhaust we sort of have to count down. That was 0.8. 0.8, let's say it will go around again. So it would have been 2.8, and it's 23 degrees. And this should be the last one on the exhaust. The exhaust should be closed now. Yep, it is. So the inlet come around, should be closing about 70 odd mil. That's 64. Oh, there we go, 64. It's a little bit strange. So the inlet center line is 116.5. These camshafts, the R series cam first appeared in the F1, and in the F1 the inlet center line was about 110 degrees, and they got about 110 degrees lobe separation, so that means exhaust center line will also be 110 degrees. So basically in an F1 it was installed what you might call straight up with even split of the separation. But when they put the 750 cam into the Carby engine in the Peso, they retarded them 9 degrees. I don't really know why. Possibly because they were trying to get some top end into them, and so retarding the cam would exaggerate the top end. It'd hurt the mid-range, but possibly by the time with the longer manifold on the Weber carb and the standard mufflers, it was a compromise they were willing to make. So we'll check the exhaust timing. To just check the exhaust, it's 53 plus 23 plus 180 divided by 2, 128 minus 23, 105. I have 105 degrees exhaust calculated center line and 116.5 degrees inlet calculated center line. So if you want to know what the lobe separation is, you just add those together and divide it by 2, 110.75, which is what I would expect for this cam. All we need to know now is just where it is, and so we'll work off that when we get some other numbers out of it. So the next thing I'll do now is I'll just go through and measure the lift, the valve lift at these crank positions before top dead center, 30 degrees to 40 degrees after, and then we pull the belts off and rotate the engine back to these positions again and rotate the cams to see how much lift we have available. So the lift we have and the available lift, subtract them, you get the clearance. So I've got a mirror set up out here so I can see what the exhaust is doing. And it's 30 degrees before top dead center at the overlap, and I can see that the exhaust has got 5.55 mil lift. So exhaust will put 5.55, and the inlet has got 0.15. It's fairly tedious. So 0.3. And 5.1. Often the gauge is working backwards at this point, so you have to convert the numbers. 0.5, 4.65. At the maximum, these cams often lift at about half a millimetre per 5 degrees. 15, we got 0.75 and 4.25. But this 750R cam isn't a very aggressive cam. It's pretty casual in the grand scheme of things. Doesn't do anything particularly quickly. 3.7. .4 and 3.25. Top third centre. Before we had 1.8 and 2.8. .8, 2.25. What's that one? 35, 2.35. 0.75, 1.9, 3.25, 0.55, 3.75, and see this one's lifting at about 0.5 mil per 5 degrees or 0.1 mil per degree. So 1.225. 0.9 and 4.3. 4.3, 4.85. That's picked up a little bit. 0.65. We're sort of well out of the zone here now. Usually you find by now you can just rotate the cam. The piston will never touch it at this point. 5.4, 0.45. And 5.9 and 0.3. So that's our sheet of lift at the cam. And we are going to move these cams, but I'll probably advance it to about 111, 112 degrees. I think should work okay with this engine. At that timing, the inlet closing is the same as the inlet closing we use on the 900 cams. They have a lot more duration, which is biased towards the inlet opening. What I'm going to do now is pull the belts off and rotate the cam over by hand and see where it stops. So now we've got the belts off. What I do is turn the engine back to 30 degrees before top dead center. And generally when you're doing this, you should get about the same available lift either side of top dead center. Should. So I might get a tool. When you start getting spring pressure on it, it makes it easier if you're using a tool just to turn the cam over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, ooh, hitting it there, 9.15. And on the exhaust, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way over. 8.55. And when you're advanced cams, you actually move the exhaust valve away from the piston, but I just want to know where we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.65. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.55. So that's plus because the piston's not hitting the valve at that point. Well, the valve's not hitting the piston. Yeah. So inlet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.6. Sorry, 6.4. And on the exhaust, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.55 again. Wow. So the exhaust valve still isn't actually near the piston. So this is 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5.4. Yep, 5.4. If you get confused, do it again. You don't get bonus points for getting it wrong. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, it's just touching. 8.5. Wow, finally. Ten degrees before. Inlet 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.65. On the exhaust, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.75. Five degrees before top dead center. One, 2, 3, 4, 4.2. I don't think it has anywhere near as much piston to valve clearance as I've seen in others. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.3. Top dead center. 1, 2, 3, 4. 405. And then the exhaust. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7.15. I wonder if I put the piston the right way around. Sure it was. So 5 degrees after. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.25. 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.55. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.65. $15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0.25. $15's about where the inlet is closest to the piston. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.4. $20, we're sort of getting into the safe zone. We're getting to the away from it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.25. Exhaust. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All the way over. Into the inlet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. Don't bother doing exhaust because it's just going all the way over now. So 30. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. $35. I think it'll probably go all the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.3. So all the way over. So that's 9.3 plus at 35 degrees. So that's our specs. And what we can do now is work out how much clearance there is. So this is all the data that we wrote down. That's the inlet valve lift there that we measured. On the right hand side you can see the calculated camshaft centre line. And that's important because all this info is relative to that centre line. And when we change the centre line later on, we'll move the centre line 5 degrees because all our measurements were in 5 degree increments. So that way what was top dead centre becomes 5 degrees before top dead centre, sort of thing. So the centre line is the reference that you use to make all of it make sense. That's the exhaust lift we measured there. And again on the right hand side, the exhaust centre line. The second line is the available lift that we measured, and we had the timing belts off and we're turning the cam over at different crankshaft positions. That's the inlet there in the blue and the exhaust in the red. And as you can see on the exhaust numbers, there's lots of 8.55 plus, which just means that this engine has massive amounts of exhaust piston to valve clearance. When you measure this, the numbers at top dead center should be the smallest in terms of available, because that's when the piston's closest to the head. You'll see either side of that the numbers aren't exactly the same. There's sort of a 0.1, 0.15 difference, and that is to some extent just the way the engine works, and it's also probably into how I'm rounding it mentally when I'm writing the numbers down. If the number's 1.85, I'll probably write 1.8 or maybe 1.9. So you introduce a little bit of error there. It's not big enough to be a real issue, and because this isn't completely exact, but we're just after a good indication of what the numbers are. And this is the clearances, and this is simply the available lift minus the actual lift. So you can see the inlet there at the top in blue, and it's tightest at about 10 degrees after top dead center. That's usually what I expect. 10 to 15 degrees after top dead center is where your inlet piston to valve clearance is the tightest. And realistically, if you're measuring this, you don't need to measure the inlet before top dead center or the exhaust after top dead center, really. Non exhaust, that's the exhaust clearance there, and it's tightest at about 10 degrees before top dead center, but at 4.05 millimeters, it's got lots and lots of clearance. So if we advance the camshaft 5 degrees, all we've basically done is take the numbers in the spreadsheet and move them all the lift numbers, one column to the left, which is the same as moving the camshaft 5 degrees advanced. And that will reduce the piston to valve clearance on the inlet. And given it's a single cam engine and the exhaust cam's just following along, it will increase the piston to valve clearance on the exhaust. That's just how it works. So now at our tightest point on the inlet, it's still 10 degrees after top dead center, and we're down to 1.3 millimeters. I would have said at the start I would aim for 1.5, but realistically on a 2V engine, 1.3 is probably okay. This engine is in an Elephant. It's not going to get revved that hard, so you wouldn't have any issues at 1.3. And that 1.3 is at a 111.5 degree center line, which you can see on the right hand side. And I ended up setting these cams at 112 degrees inlet center line. I recall years ago when we started doing a lot of cam timing work, we checked a 900 Monster, and as delivered, I think one of the inlet cams was at about 102 degrees, and so it had less than 1 mil clearance as delivered, and it was certainly fine. So I don't think it's a really big deal, but 1.3 still feels safe to me. 1 millimeter would start to feel unsafe to me, and if I was doing a 4 valve, I certainly wouldn't go to 1 millimeter, because you have to allow for the fact that those engines are going to get revved a bit harder than this 2 valve would. On the exhaust, we now got 4.5 millimeters, and that's what happens when you advance an exhaust cam. You end up with more clearance. So really there's no need to worry about the exhaust. Often we retard the exhaust cams on the 4 valve engines to decrease the lobe separation, and in that instance you can start to move your exhaust valves closer to your piston. And that's piston to valve clearance.